I'm also just such
Really
a
good. I had a track meet today.
Yeah,
How'd it go?
sure.
Yeah, pretty good.
Nice.
Hey.
Yeah, was that?
That was coffee.
How are you?
Okay.
Yeah.
You throw a shot, right?
Yeah, I watched your javelin.
What is it, javelin disc? Okay. Cool.
Rachel, you want to come here?
Oh, that's all right.
Okay. You're set up.
We got Long Beach traffic.
Yeah.
Coming down 2 weeks?
It was a rough afternoon.
We were hoping to send it to the high school. It has to be done by August. Okay, do you want to wait? Something went right.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today is, what is today? Today's Wednesday, May 14th, 2025. This is the meeting of the School Redistricting Start Times and Transportation Advisory Committee. It is 5:38. I will pass around the sign-in. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have a quorum. And just for housekeeping, if for some reason you did not get information about this meeting, write your email down, so we're just going to check it because we know we have one member with a wrong email address. And I just rather confirm with everybody. So that way. All right, first up is public comment, so I'm going to grab the comment sheet. Did everybody sign up for public comment? We don't have our typical note taker tonight. Is anyone willing to take minutes for tonight? Just bullet.
I'll do the best I can.
Thank you. Can you?
Yeah, I can do it.
Want to
You have better
do
notebook
a
than I do.
Google
What's that?
document? You want to type in that way?
Sure.
Do it again later. Thank you. All right, so first up for public comment, we have Rubia.
Hi, thank you. I've been observing this over the past few months and attending meetings, and thank you to all of you. I know this job is hard. I also know it's probably hard to have a productive working meeting when you've got, you know, a group of parents with pitchforks watching you. So, kind of.
That's not how we interpret.
But I just wanted to piggyback off of something that a community member said at the last meeting related to data. And I, you know, as an auditor, I recognize that data is incredibly important. And I recognize that numbers and capacity are going to be one of the largest driving factors in this process. However, I also ask that we think about both quantitative and qualitative data. So, for example, as we're working through this with the whole district, can any of these solutions help solve or remediate existing disparities? So I am a proud parent of a Hamilton kindergartner. I live off Daniel Drive. And I also recognize that Hamilton has very little what I'll call economic diversity. We have an amazing PTO who does a ton of work. And we're also able to have fundraisers like golf tournaments, right? Like silent auctions at wineries with med spa gift cards up for grabs. And I think that's all fantastic, but I just want to make sure as we do this, we are really thinking about the needs of all of the children. So for example, I would like to make sure that for those few lower income families that are at Hamilton, we're not moving them out of Hamilton and creating greater disparity there. When we think about Quidnesset and, you know, our Title I schools and our Title I students, economic diversity is a wonderful thing. And also, what will the impacts of larger class sizes be, and how will we continue to support those students? I would also really like us, as I know we will, think of creative solutions. I know kindergarten age-in or kindergarten phase-in is probably a popular option with parents. However, I understand also that that's an administrative and nightmare, especially when it comes to transportation. Are there ways to give parents options, right? Yeah, you want to phase in at kindergarten, or you want your kid to stay in this school. Okay, well, you have a choice, and that choice may involve you need to provide your own transportation or go to a bus stop that is not close to your home or in your neighborhood. That's a choice you have. So that's pretty much it. It's brief, but some things that I would like the committee to think about, and also, if there's any way that the community can continue to support this committee and get you the resources that you need, speak up about that, because I would like to think that this community would come together.
Thank you. Next is Sean Taylor.
Hey guys, sure you're tired of hearing from me, but this time it's actually a pretty easy one. I know as you guys start looking forward, you're going to be looking at kind of future goals, and I have some ideas for maybe some goals or metrics perhaps that might help in analysis. One idea that I wanted to put forward was, I know that we've been talking about capacity numbers, but I think Dr. Duva pointed out that some of those capacity numbers don't really reflect what the building can be utilized for based on the programming there. It might be very useful if an LEA capacity or something else that can be tailored to the use case of the building as planned were used as part of the analysis of any given scenario moving forward. I think this would be really helpful in telling, hey, okay, there's the overcrowding per aspirational, but then there's the overcrowding based on what we can actually do. You can only fit so many kids in a room or a certain program. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but that could be very helpful. I'd also recommend we consider that in any scenario, a metric that might be helpful would be looking at the total number of overcrowded or at risk of overcrowding classrooms in the district, not just in the coming year, but maybe in the next at the 3-year mark, 5-year mark, and 10-year mark. This might sound excessive, but whenever you look at a KPI or something like that, looking at kind of a projection like that gives you a digestible number of data points, and you can see any kind of trending impact or potential outliers that you might want to look at further. Another idea, kind of working with what the last speaker was speaking to, you can quantify some of those things that are a little more qualitative. I believe Colleen, which I don't think she's here, but she was speaking about the SCC percentages, I think, for the economic challenge of given students. For example, you could look at the before and after of that, maybe on a more private level. I don't know if that's public facing, but you could look at, are you moving schools towards the average or away from the average? And are you doing so substantially or in some kind of margin that is not really negatively affecting things? These are just some ideas. I wanted to throw them out there. I know I keep asking you guys to think about things, so I wanted to provide some ideas. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Next is Amanda Meller.
Hello. Mine is also pretty straightforward tonight. I know this committee's time is precious, and I wanted to share my key takeaways from the last school committee meeting in case you didn't have a chance to watch it. So first, I think that the committee had expressed a need for additional data to really get a full picture of what we're dealing with here. So comments were made that the current data set that was presented, I think a couple weeks ago, is great and a step in the right direction, but really doesn't show the full picture. And so there was a request to layer on, I think, things like the distribution of voluntary students by grade. Personally, I would love to better understand the true capacity at Fishing Cove. I know that the last sheet we saw, it made it look like there was quite a bit of capacity, but the reality, Dr. Duva, as you mentioned, is that due to the special education requirements, it's not like really a good estimation of true capacity in that building. And then lastly, I guess similar to something that Sean just mentioned, maybe more data on the bubble classes in some of the schools and following them over a multi-year trajectory, I think would be really helpful. The second takeaway I had is that multiple committee members had expressed support of an outside consultant bringing into this process, maybe potentially even finding some funding for something like that. I think, you know, various members of the community, myself included, would be supportive of that. And then I think, sorry, what is your name, Rubia? Okay, Rubia. So Rubia mentioned this, but I think someone, at least one member, had expressed wanting to see a plan proposed that's more of a phased approach to keep kids, established children within their existing schools. And I love, you know, I think that's a great idea. Like, let's be creative. If there are transportation issues, perhaps there are creative ways to address them. And then the last takeaway I had, just for consideration of this group, I think there were at least one or two people that mentioned that December might be an aggressive timeline to make a formal decision for the September 2026 year, just sort of based on the historical trajectory of decision making in the group. So I guess, you know, one question I have that I'd love to hear from Dr. Duva, if time permitting, is, you know, sort of what is the budgetary consideration that is promulgating that recommendation? So thank you.
Next is Bob Armentano.
Hi, everyone. One thing I wanted to talk about that I don't think we really spoke about at all in these meetings was the way that students are enrolled. Right now, we still have this first come, first served policy. Dr. Duve, I heard you say at the last meeting, there's 12 kids that didn't make it, and they were the last 12 to sign up. Therefore, they're going to be the ones that will probably not get in to whichever school that was. And this kind of created the problem in the first place before we were even here. I know I was one of the families I was told my son couldn't go there when my daughter was there, and I lived under a mile away. We put up an uproar about it and ended up getting another class in that school, and I think that happened in another grade as well.
We are considering if they have siblings or not, so there isn't a split.
I know. I really think, though, what you guys need to consider is let's not turn it into concert tickets, and whoever signs up first or gets the Facebook message first gets to go and sign up. Let's give them a date, May 1st, June 1st, look at the population that signed up, and then choose the 3 classes. I mean, I think you guys should consider something like that.
Chair over here by the front of the...
I think you guys should consider something like that when it comes to how we are enrolling the students. Otherwise, you're inevitably going to have another situation where it gets overbooked, and it's just not equitable to just say, I know in the past when it happened to us, there wasn't even anything on the website. Now on the website it says, you know, we will enroll people on a first come, first served basis, but I really think this committee should think about that. Try maybe to do that another way. Tell people, oh, we're overbooked. Does somebody want to go somewhere else? Does somebody want to do a different transportation? Are there any volunteers? Otherwise, make a decision at that time, again, based on location, siblings, and what just seems best, you know. I just think that's something that hasn't been discussed at all, and it's kind of what has been the root of this problem, or one of the big things that contributed to it from the beginning. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew about that, and perhaps that could be one of the new goals as something to address. Thanks.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? That's all that signed up. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, next item, which is what we're going to focus on for this meeting, is setting of future goals of the advisory committee. I shared out a Google document. That document had the charge of this committee that was set forth by the school committee. That's what I had on the computer. Which was set forth by the school committee along with the goals, and then pretty much kind of suggestions coming through. So I will put it up on the screens. It's a working document. That way we can work off of that and have conversations and discussions for the goals of this committee as we move forward. Right, so the top half should look familiar to the committee, because it is the charge that the school committee approved back in October. Do you have duties and goals from school committee charge? The duties of the school redistricting, start times, and transportation advisory committee shall include, but not be limited to advising, assisting, and making recommendations to the school committee and or superintendent on the following matters. These goals will guide the advisory committee in making well-informed decisions, supporting students, families, staff, and the community. And that is to have a balanced enrollment, to include community engagement, accessibility, future growth, minimize disruption, school start times. There's some that are added, we'll go back to that there. Transportation, and then short-term goals will be recommended for the 25-26 school year to address overcrowding in the elementary schools, and long-term goals will be addressed to create a balanced enrollment and efficiencies across the district for all schools pre-K to 12. We know that last bullet we've obviously adjusted for this year, but those were the kind of the main categories for us to be going through. What we'll do is we'll go through like what was added and have discussions of this, and then other action steps that are within this, and we can talk through this and add and go through of the route that we're gonna go, so. Under community engagement, we have involved parents, students, and community members in the decision-making process to gather input and foster support. Someone added, invite all educators, particularly the principals of all North Kingstown School Department schools pre-K to 12, to engage actively in idea generation and feedback. Also is added for consideration of before and after school care options directly connected to investigating school start times, as well as minimizing anxiety and accessibility for families, and built into conversations of transportations. Recommendations may also investigate affordable before and after care options for all schools pre-K to 12. School academic calendar and or duration of school day. Consider supporting community needs, addressing overall well-being, optimizing academic performance, and optimizing safety through consideration of potential changes to the academic calendar year, cadence of school vacation days, duration of school days, and other child and family-centered related factors. Under transportation, recommendations may be considered following the investigation of alternative transportation methods, including purchasing vans and or other transitions away from dependence on traditional large yellow school bus options. Data analytics and best practices. Ensure thoughtful and deliberate development of recommendation by reviewing research by specialists in relevant specialist fields, and by partnering with experts in data analytics and best practices in higher education. So those are additional things for us to consider. We can't change the charge of the committee, but we can definitely put those as action steps of what we want to consider moving forward. Just kind of conversation with the committee regarding that, discussion of what was added there.
My only question is thinking about biting off more than we can chew, for lack of a better word, like having too much on our plate. I know one of the things you had mentioned, I believe, at the last meeting was whether or not moving forward we would divide into, maybe I misremember, but I think you said that one thing would be divide into teams, that we would kind of delve deeper in smaller teams, and maybe that would allow to take on more tasks. I think that the additional comments are valid and good. Some of them, like the before and after school care options, which is a huge thing and definitely a need, but that's a big thing. It's and complicated. I just worry about that question about how much we can take on. And what maybe perhaps whether some of these things can be like, we do this first, and then if we have time, we get to, is that an option? Yeah.
I agree, Lydia. I think that we have a significantly large scope and these are all valid recommendations that are brought up, they're all legitimate things, but I agree, I think that, sometimes doing too much is a great way to accomplish nothing. You know, so we have to make sure that we really kind of hone in on what are the must-haves. You know, what are the really important things, and not let perfection be the enemy of good. Like, we wanna make sure we get the boxes checked that are the most important, and even if we don't get everything that we see as being the need. I think it's important to really focus that work as we move forward. You know, to me, you know, I think of things, you know, I know that some of the comments made here, but we've talked a lot about equity of building utilization being a key. You know, to me, that's a must-have. I'm just gonna give you my opinion. Equity of building utilization is something we need to address. We see it obviously with overcrowding, we see it with our populations in different buildings, just being significantly, you know, like different, skewed. So that to me is an outcome we really wanna look at. I also think the points that we brought up, you know, that some of our speakers brought up, and also that people on the committee have brought up, is the diversity within our populations in schools. Looking at that as a goal, looking at that as something that is definitely an outcome that we wanna look at. Right now, obviously, that's not where it needs to be. How can we make that something that's an end that we're striving to? I would also say, you know, and Lydia knows this better than anybody, the Title I status is a very, very critical piece. And so we have to be really mindful of that, and making sure that we are making decisions that's not going to bring into question maybe some resources that our students need. So that's really, really important. I think that's a key thing. You know, and the other thing for me at least is the start times piece, right? To me, the start time should be looked at, and that should be really something analyzed. I think right now, like, a big part of the formation of this committee was looking at the start time, especially at our high school, of how early it is, and that being looked at. Again, that's a tough one. You know, that's a tough one. There's a lot of factors that play into that, especially budget-wise. But I think that needs to be looked. That's my feeling. You know, and I'm, again, not the be-all end-all by any stretch of the imagination, but the more I look at this, the more I think, like, these are the things that really need to come out of the discussion.
To add on to that, I fully agree about biting off more than we can chew. I think these are three huge topics that could easily be their own advisory group, and I am not advocating for any more advisory groups, seriously. I'm just saying this was a lot. I know, I don't think any of us were involved in the decision back in the day to create all three of these things into one committee. Separating out transportation, I'm still struggling to understand how we as a committee can do anything about transportation, because the way I look at it is that is an administrative / budgetary issue, and that has to deal with the administration / school committee who approves of the ultimate budget. I would just really like to understand the charge that we are being given as far as transportation is concerned. I fully have faith in you to do what you're supposed to be doing, and Dr. Duva and, you know, Mr. Mezzanotte, as far as the administration goes. I just don't, I've always been concerned about us trying to look at transportation before you all do, and if you came back to us with a recommendation or the school committee, that's a whole different story. But to start from scratch and say, here, try to figure, I don't even know what we're trying to figure out with transportation. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say, I don't even know what we're trying to figure out. Yeah, would we all like to be more efficient in everything we do in this district? Absolutely, but I feel like you're doing that. You're not trying to cost us money. You're not trying, you know, you're trying, you're working with what you have. I'm just very confused about the transportation piece.
I will say, going back to, back to October, when I presented the original charge and then other items were added, what was approved by the school committee at the time was for this group, with having members of the transportation department part of this, to bring a recommendation forward to the school committee of how we can make our transportation services more efficient, looking at other ways of providing transportation besides school buses, which Michelle and her department, myself, have already been working on separate from this. Because what we can do is, as we do it, we can bring it forward to run it by the committee for ideas and kind of checks and balances, and then proposing that to the school committee. I would not look at this committee to generate those ideas, but as a sounding board.
Sure. I personally, I think the redistricting and then I guess secondary start time to me are our top priority, should be our top priorities.
I agree, redistricting needs to be the number one, that needs to be the number one. With that, you're gonna make changes to transportation.
Right,
And
as like
you-
a secondary.
Yeah, and as you do that, you're going to, I'm saying you, we are going to investigate how we make that more efficient. We're already making some changes that are, will be coming up. We're making changes in how we're going to be transporting students that go to charter schools and private schools. A letter went out that we're doing depots instead of doing curb to curb. There's gonna be depots in town. That's gonna cut down on time, which eventually can cut down a number of buses and putting other buses back in for other purposes.
The opt-in, we just got
Going
the
to-
opt-in.
yep, the
That was a
opt-in's
great,
going
that
out.
was a great
That way we
new
can
thing.
really identify how many children truly need a ride every day. And I know we talked about it in the letter, putting out there. If you don't need transportation every day, but hey, I might need it once or twice a year, that's okay. We can provide that, you just need to notify us. Don't sign up just because you think you need it. Because we really wanna get down to what do we need, how many buses? Because if we can take, and these are conversations we can have, a bus offline from in district, we can put that bus out of district and save money on the costs that we have from statewide that are very concerning. So these are things that we are kind of working on that we can then bring back to the committee and ask these other ideas. I don't see this committee as having to come up with necessarily those. I think we gotta focus on the redistricting, and it'll also lead to that, but it'll also help us get to start times.
Right.
Can
So-
she have her here, if I can.
Well, I was just gonna jump in
balance.
as the person who wrote these, if that's all right.
Yeah.
To say, two things. One is that, the reason I brought them up is these things are all part of the same tapestry, right? And we heard people saying we don't wanna have to do this again in the future. So it's not necessarily that I thought we need to do all of these. I think these are questions for us to think about, things to consider as we plan forward. For example, if we come up with more before and after school care options, we have fewer kids on the buses, right? Because parents are dropping or picking up differently. So we do have the things that have to get fixed right now, but we also can be considerate of that. If we provide different options, how are we actually depopulating the buses so we're able to have more options? If we consider different things like the vans, we become much more flexible in terms of routes and how fast we can turn around pickups and drop-offs. And so again, these are certainly not a list of demands. This was more an opportunity to start having a conversation to see what really is within the scope of this committee and what else might we kick up to the school committee to be addressed on that level. These are huge things. But I think we have a moment here to really push for change. Like, what do we want our committee to look like? What do we want our community to look like? And so I would say these are more kind of mindsets to keep in mind going forward rather than demands of what this committee has to do. The thing I would really push for, however, is two things. One is to talk to data analytics specialists because they're going to be able to provide us with different insight and from an outside perspective. The models they have are going to be far superior to anything we have access to just because, I mean, quite frankly, we work with Brown because it's Brown, right? They're going to have top of the line stuff. The other thing I think is really important, and that was another thing put in there, was to look at the research. What does the research say? Where there is research, what it's applicable about. For example, we know during COVID, children were in more danger because they were home more with parents who either weren't able to attend to them or who shouldn't have been in the home with them. We know that food insecurity went up. We know there was a whole host of other issues happened because children were not in school. So those are some of the pieces I'm also putting together in these conversations, but also what is in the literature, the specialist peer-reviewed information that we can bring so we can, really elevate. And as somebody was saying, like, all kids should get a chance to thrive here, right? So how can we draw on what's out there, other models at other schools, so that we can look both, yes, at what needs to be fixed today, but also have that zoom out. What is the larger picture and how do we build towards that? So thank you for sharing your spot tonight now.
Oh,
You
no,
the floor.
You're fine, no. I was just gonna say, as I read through the initial ones, a lot of them are sort of fit into one of the other bigger categories, right? So like if you're thinking about redistricting, some of the bullets that were at the top that were already there, and some of the considerations are things that we should be doing as we're thinking about redistricting, minimizing disruption, some of those bullets at the top. So I wouldn't say every bullet is a new topic, I guess, but some fit in one of those three categories. And I agree with Megan. I was thinking through transportation too, and how we could help with that as it really becomes one, as we're thinking about different redistricting options, transportation is important, because you're not gonna take a kid that's on the bus for 15 minutes and put them on a bus for 45 minutes. And so I see it more as less of a, I guess, a point we're trying to solve for, but something to support the other more bigger priority, I guess. In my mind, that's how I was looking at it, but I'm glad you mentioned it, so, thinking some of that as well.
Can I just say one other small thing? To me, the bullet, minimize disruption, the description following it makes a lot of sense to me. But I worry, and maybe this is me overthinking, cause I have a tendency to overthink. The saying minimize disruption means try to make as few changes as possible to have the outcome, and I think that's part of what, through our conversations, I kind of thought by the end of it, we were saying, well, maybe we need to look at the district more broadly in terms of what changes. So I wonder if calling that bullet instead of minimizing disruption, which suggests to me, and maybe I'm overthinking it, that we will change as, just change this street and this street. Like, maybe we need to be a little bit more disruptive, yet still make the transitions as smooth as possible for students and families, reduce anxiety about changes. But maybe to put as part of the charge, minimizing disruption is kind of like, there's some metaphor for it, but it makes our work harder because we're trying to make as few changes as possible, and sometimes well thought out changes are a little more, but they work better even if it means making a few more disruptions. And then the other thing is that one of the comments that was added for the community engagement piece, I think that I remember some of the comments from the citizens' comments have been about making sure that voices from all the school communities are heard, and I think that the comment added about inviting folks from all the schools to be able to provide feedback, if there's a way that we can fold that in so that we are making sure that all the different, not as part of the committee, but we're getting feedback. I think that before the last meeting, maybe Dr. Duva, you had gotten feedback from the different principals, and kind of considering that in terms of our community engagement as an ongoing strategy. I thought that was what that purple comment on that bullet was getting at, and I thought it was probably a wise.
So the intent when we did originally put this committee together, and I just want to put this out there, was to get involvement from every elementary school. And we did get a representative from every school but Forest Park. I cannot expect every single principal to be at every single meeting every time, so we do have two. Colleen's is here when she can. We do get input from the principals. We can discuss how we get additional input from other members of the community through this process. I think the public forum has shared a lot. We have listened and considered everyone that has come forward. I would hope people understand and respect that has happened. But we can't say we can have everyone at the table.
No,
right?
and I wasn't
But we can make sure we have a
suggesting that.
representative
I
from
mean,
every school.
I think that I guess I was saying, I thought that what you had done, and maybe this has been going on all along, but it was definitely shared in a different way, which is to have, the conversations you have when we're not having a meeting with others, that you then would report, that you shared, like you did those principal statements. I think it's helpful to not have at the table all the principals, that doesn't make any sense, but to feel like they have an opportunity to contribute through conversations not during I think it's valuable.
Can I just add add to what you said about minimize disruption, because I know I mentioned it earlier, and I think I said it at the last meeting. To me, when we were first formed, some of the discussion was around some of the issues elementary-wide and creating less disruption for middle schools. Because you've got kids that have transitioned or spent years with the same kids, and I'm not suggesting that it has to stay, because clearly we have concerns and issues. But I think minimizing middle school changes that are gonna disrupt middle school will create more disruption, more anxiety, and more change for kids that are now gonna have to change at middle school, now potentially not having a history with any of those kids, potentially. So it's just something to consider, 'cause so I understand in some ways why that was there, and that was something that I know you brought to us initially and said, you know, as a committee, we'll do everything we can. It was something that came up on the board multiple times that people commented on not disrupting middle school. And so I think I read that as that disruption, if we can avoid it in whatever we do at the elementary level, would be better in some ways.
I just wanna say I completely agree with the recommendation to leverage data experts if we can. I mean, not only would it help us make more informed and sound decisions, it would inspire a lot of trust in the community. Brought up some concerns, so if that's a possibility, I think it's a no-brainer.
I did raise that at the last school committee meeting as a recommendation.
And did they have a response to that, or is that something that would possibly happen so we can move forward?
I mean, I was in favor of it. I think Jen Lima was sitting next to me, she was in favor of it. I think it's just a matter of budgetary,
I would say
cause we've already,
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, as a superintendent, I'm moving forward and looking at what would be required to do so.
Okay.
yeah, I think
It
that's.
is not budgeted, so I do have to
Right.
find money for it,
Oh, I know.
but
In theory, Brown has grants for this kind of thing, so if the body is willing, we can look into how we can get someone else to pay for it.
I would always.
I think we are willing to.
I can't promise, I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't know until you try.
Right, exactly.
And it is something that, you know, when you bring a consultant in, we have to follow our procurement policies, so you have to put information out to bid. Not information, you have to put the RFPs out there to
It's part of
accept bids.
student, which you might be part of a graduate student project. Is that then hiring a vendor, or is that
If it is,
fulfilling an educational mission?
well, I have to look into exactly
Fair.
what the work is that they're doing and.
Yeah. Fair.
I agree.
I-
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I agree with that, as, getting as much data as we can from whomever can give us the best information. Just a question, like, so what would that timeline look like? So when the committee gets all that information, we can actually, like, look at it and move forward. So is it like a 3 month, 2 months?
Probably depends what we're asking for.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So can I ask a follow-up to that? Oh, sorry, just,
go ahead.
I'm just curious, would we be using some of the analytics that have already come in that you did budget for with the last
Yeah, so
market
you-
analysis,
so
like how would that,
We would be moving off of the current study we have.
the current
Right,
study?
so Cropper did the demographic study.
Mhm.
They are also a company that could consult on this as well, and
Mhm.
they have already completed a bulk of that work
Sure.
moving forward. You can't just go directly to them, because you do have to follow a process of
Mhm.
putting a request out there,
Gotcha,
and then you have to look at the bids that come in.
gotcha.
So I've been exploring options on the understanding I have no authority to do and make any decisions. There is a professor who runs the master's day science program who will have interns there over the, not interns, sorry, will have graduate students looking for practicum experience over the summer. So theoretically, if everything followed the appropriate procedures, and again, kind of all the stars aligned, theoretically, these graduate students then could be 2 or 3 of them working on this project with the data we provide, potentially also pulling data from other sources available to them if they were relevant. And they can run data models for what we're looking for. So part of it would be, what questions are we asking? What are we looking for them to model for us and to investigate? They bring with them experience. They know how to use the tools. They have a sense of what questions to ask, especially from a different perspective. They are also people who don't have children in the school district, and probably don't. Most of them don't have children at all, and so they also come to it really from the sense of intellectual curiosity of, you know, what else is out there, what's possible. But yeah, in theory, if we were able to proceed, they could work on it over the summer. They could potentially meet with this committee with some of the things that they are able to explore, and hopefully they could have actual proposals for us in the fall. But that again means
Right.
everything has to
I think
line up.
what we can use, I know you two have already met on that and discussed, and I think we need to, I think, move forward of what those options would look like for us.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Because we would want that information sooner rather than later, so we can meet our goal for
yeah,
December.
we wanna give them time to be able to look.
Right.
Well, I think that's why we talked, why we're agendaing this item is almost like to consider, like, what do we want to ask this group to go do? And so, like, what are we tasking them with to go do their thing and figure out, like, what they can come back with on a recommendation with, what are the things that we really wanna see come out of the work?
Well-
And I mean, I would be interested in obviously doing this, like, what we've talked about. But I also wouldn't, you know, I would also wanna keep on the table the proper option. You know, I know it's,
Or some,
it's, right,
professional consultant.
professional consultant, obviously, that's who did it before, but, you know, a professional consultant as well, because to me, it's like the more data we can get back, I think the better, especially considering the complexity here.
Right, and also having professionals step in that do this at a national level, right, can look at things slightly different than how we're looking at it, and to come in and provide those recommendations for us to consider. Especially when we're also talking about start times.
I think
There's a lot of best practices regarding start times, and that is a conversation that happens across the state, especially around the high school level, over and over. It is something that this district already looked at years ago, no changes were made, right? So, I think having that expertise also would help guide this group.
I think something that I struggle with, and I think that it's been mentioned many times by many different people on this committee in public, is the issue of equity specifically amongst our, I'm not even gonna include the middle schools because we're getting a new Wickford Middle, let's see what happens there, but specifically amongst the elementary schools, the 5 different elementary schools. Because where I struggle is, in an ideal world, it would be wonderful to have a diverse group of students across the board, across the schools. But the reality is, how do you maybe diversify the community when it's just based on where you live? And if everyone, you know, Rubia, is it? When you were talking about Hamilton being, you know, a certain makeup, a certain demographic of people, you know, we don't wanna have to, I mean, transportation-wise, what are we going to do? We're gonna send kids all over the place, and maybe this is where a consultant coming in can figure out a problem that to me seems impossible, but that's because that's not my wheelhouse. I would love to see more diversity. Colleen Laughlin last time around was talking about how can we diversify our schools, and I just always thought, I don't know how we can, because it's really just where people buy houses and where people are living.
There are, but there's ways
And-
for us to look at this, and we've been
Right,
looking at the demographics of where those needs are.
Right, but
What
rather than
other schools are they-
redistricting and redrawing
But what
lines.
schools are they closest to? Gonna say something that not everyone's going to agree with. It will be a challenge, I'm thinking, being careful with my words. It will be a challenge to come up with a plan that does not include absolutely no changes to the school boundary lines in order to make this work. When you look at where the population is laid out in this town and where the schools are located and the size of the schools. It would be a challenge
I
not to
agree.
make any changes in the boundary.
I just think the difference going forward versus maybe the last few months is people would have a heads up. This would be like in the future, and people would have time to prepare and everything if we do it the right way. I think we're going to have to make some sort of move and shifting of lines at some point, maybe, but hopefully, like I've always said, a one-time thing versus every 3 years, every 4, every 2 years, whatever.
I agree, this is not
X
something we should be doing every 5 years.
Right.
The last time it was done, I think it was 9 years ago, roughly, was it 9 years ago? 5 years, 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
5 years ago, sorry, 5 years ago. So, but, you know, you gotta look at what we can do so we're not doing that so often.
Right, and again, beating a dead horse here, sounding like a broken record, but I would love to maybe have an outside company come in and just help us.
So should we make a motion? Should a motion be made that, we have to make a motion of like?
Wait, so why don't you come to the table?
You're on the committee.
I know there's no
It's already being disruptive, so, sorry, I went on autopilot to the high school, you know. It wasn't even looking, I just went. I'm a little bit concerned, and I'm not sure if I should say this, but I'm a little bit concerned about having too much information. I like having an outside person coming in and doing the information and disaggregating and looking for it. But then my concern is that data is gonna be reviewed by other people and then, analyzed it in a different way. That's my only concern. But I'm still in support of it, but I think it's a cautionary tale. Because anytime we brought data forward, it's been looked at and then reanalyzed in multiple different ways with very different outcomes, is what I'm looking for, that's all.
To answer your question about if we should bring a motion forward, I mean, I just so everyone is very well aware, the FY '26 budget, is pretty much set, almost 100% set, meaning, right, we're probably
There's
not
no
going.
room to add anything.
Thank you,
I
there's
mean,
no
that's
room
what I'm
to
saying.
add
However,
anything.
it doesn't mean we can't look and find ways of.
I'm just saying, if
Other
we make a
sources of
motion
funds.
now, I just don't want people to, have their fingers crossed that we're gonna be able to do something.
I think what we gotta do, I'm already kind of moving forward with that, is we need to explore, right? We need to explore what this would be. You have to put something out there, you need to see what the cost is, and then okay, can you afford it?
So, are you saying you're doing that?
I would like to do that.
Okay.
I kinda, I brought it up at the last school committee meeting, and I think, that's something we just need to do, and, what I would say is that, we have 2 meetings left before the end of this year. One of those agendas is a proposal that goes forward.
So we could make a motion tonight to recommend,
Make a
you start looking into it so that we bring it to the school
But
committee.
this is an advisory committee to the school committee, so any recommendation that's made here is a recommendation that goes to the school committee and then approval by the school committee to move forward.
Right, so, I'm just saying to get the ball rolling, we could make the motion here and see how we vote.
To make an official recommendation to the
That's
school
right,
committee.
to move it forward, cause otherwise, we're just talking about,
But when are we pushing forward, don't we need more clarity on that, like if we're exploring?
Well, maybe that's
I think
the
that's-
word we use.
Yeah.
Exploring.
With what outcome?
Well, exploring to determine what the cost will be, to see
Right.
if it is something that we can
Feasibly.
even consider.
budget for. Because so technically, with the way our policies are, right, I can't just go and call companies and say, hey, well, how much would it cost? You have to do an official RFP, put it out there, bids come in, we see what we receive, okay, can we do this right now?
Would part of that be also exploring grants, like,
Yes.
that'd be great.
You don't have to have a motion, I can still. work
Okay.
on
You
that
don't
moving
have to have a
You
motion
don't
to
have
do
to
that,
have
that's
a-
what I was questioning,
All right.
okay.
Don't need to, I can still,
That's what-
I'm just trying to move the
under my
conversation
peer
along.
review,
Yeah,
work on that,
I-
bring it forward.
That's
It
where I
sounds
was
very
kinda-
clear that
yeah.
it sounds like this is something the committee would like.
I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, you can make a motion, I'm just saying you don't have to. Go ahead,
No,
I mean,
I
make a
don't think
motion
it's
and-
I don't think
so.
it's a bad thing to go move forward with this and explore.
So that's what we wanna do, and I think that's the sense that
So
we
that's-
are all
that's one.
feeling, that's what we wanna do. Do we wanna have any more conversation
To
around?
me, I mean, I'm gonna put that would be a goal, right? We're coming up with
Yeah.
what we're doing, so that's.
I think then once, in my opinion, once we receive that data, I think we've seen over the last however many months, creating balanced enrollment is a challenge in itself. Whether it's changing boundary lines, whether it's changing kindergarten placement, there is disruption, unfortunately. The reality is that we have schools that are overcrowded and we have schools that are underutilized, and we need to balance that enrollment. And I think that after we receive this data, that should be our number one priority. Because I think until we're able to balance the enrollment, particularly in the elementary schools, the rest isn't as accessible with community engagement, school start times, before and after school care. We really can't look at that until we know that we have safe and functional schools within our district.
Can you repeat that?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, let me try this.
Balancing
I
enrollment.
think the most important part of our goals is the balanced enrollment, because in order to look at things like future growth, before and after school care, or academic calendars and transportation, we need to ensure that our schools are safe and functioning. Transportation really is dependent on who is going to what school. So in order to finalize any of that, we would need to determine how to balance that enrollment. And I, as Dr. Dubas said, I don't think this is a popular opinion, but I do think that this is something that unfortunately causes disruption. But I think in the long run, it's for safety and it's for academic success. And I think a goal in regards to balanced enrollment is longevity. But I think that we should not disrupt where we don't have to, but I think that as a committee, we also understand we do have to disrupt as minimally as possible with that balanced enrollment, and that should be our number one priority, is to get the schools in that position.
I just wanna echo safety.
Mhm.
That's something that I don't think we've brought up enough. You know, I think as a tenet of balanced enrollment, we do need to talk about safety, which, you know, we've had a lot of comments about, you know, how to do this, but I think ultimately, if we're in an unsafe situation, we need to know that, and we need to take steps to remedy that, preferably sooner rather than later. We've met for 6 months,
I think to echo that too, from working in the most crowded most crowded school to the least crowded school, I think first and foremost, the teachers and administrators, they always put student safety first. I think that's very important. But as I stated before, I'm a 5th grade teacher that has 17 children in my class. At Hamilton, there's 3 classes of 26 5th grade children. Even just that, in my opinion, is not concerning, but that's a different scenario for learning, for any sort of emergency situation, even for walking in the hallway. That's almost an additional 10 students that are moving from one place to another, and I personally think that that's something that needs to be addressed. I know I'm a different example because we're not planning on moving 5th grade, but those are just the numbers that I have.
Can you repeat that again? Sorry, I'm just trying to get.
No, it's okay. Teachers and administrators at Hamilton, the most overcrowded schools, work very hard to make sure that they're keeping students safe. But as a 5th grade teacher who teaches 17 students opposed to 3 classes of 26, I think that that's a concern for both safety, educational benefit, interventions. You're not able to service 26 kids the same way you are 17.
So that's not something we can really change here. That's a contract. So class size is determined by the contract. that we
And I think
have.
what I mean by
So-
that is just
so this-
geographically, like where people, I think I'm trying to speak to the overcrowding versus undercrowding.
But if we are able to better balance
Yes.
or distribute where students are going, you won't have one school with higher class sizes
Mhm.
than another school with lower
Yes.
class sizes.
Yes. To balance it, to be able to meet the needs of all students.
Yeah, to better distribute the students amongst the buildings.
Yes. I just think it sounds simple, but we've seen here it's so complex to do that because it does involve moving people. But I think it is the most important part of this committee, and I think we all have the goal of doing that looking 10 years ahead. I was in this district and I got when I was here, I was moved twice from kindergarten to 5th grade. It is disruptive. I understand it from a child's perspective, but it turned out all okay. It was okay. But I think that that's what we're trying to avoid as a committee. We want to make this change to look 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
I think also as part of the balanced enrollment piece, it's not just academic success, it's also social emotional support. That plays a huge factor when we talk about balanced enrollment.
I concur with balanced enrollment, just from my own lens. It's getting really, really tricky regarding placements even within our programming, because I have to check to make sure there's a space in regular ed first. And in most of our school, or a lot of our schools, were at the max, and when I say, oh, this student isn't coming, they're like, yay, it's one more space that we have that we didn't have the day before. And I'm like, well, maybe we should hold it, cause I don't know what's moving in over the summer. So it's a little bit, I'm
Especially
still gonna make the decision
Mhm.
to put the kids in the appropriate placements, but it does cause a rippling effect.
especially for, I think we have really wonderful special education programs within this district, and each building houses a unique one. For example, Quidnesset, we have intense intervention, so students are pulled out for part of the day, and they're in my classroom for part of the day. If my class was full, they wouldn't be able to access that service. And so if we were able to balance it more, there's more room for special education to be able to meet the needs of the students, which they already do so well, or not have to make a difficult decision to move or shift.
Well, just to piggyback on that, what would happen is if we felt the need for intensive intervention was overwhelming the teachers we had, we would add additional supports.
Mhm.
So it's not because of the number of kids. If there was 26 kids in there, like there are in other places, we just provide additional people. It's not as easy though, I will say.
Mhm.
I think one of the goals that's missing here is, you know, if we make a recommendation in December, we need a goal around how that transition occurs for the families. Someone mentioned maybe giving options, like, that should be a goal of the committee too. Not just the what, but the how.
And I would add to that, maybe looking at other models of how to do like a scaffolded transition. I know we had like a visit to school when we did this redistricting last time, but what can we do more of a sequence of things that people know and understand and are able to get comfortable with it beforehand?
Dr. Duber, are you
Yes.
thinking for the 26-27 recommendation that it would be similar to where we're looking at upper class that have spent 4 or 5 years in the same school, putting any exclusions or exploring exclusions? Maybe we don't decide that based on where the recommendations come in, but is that something?
I would, because those are concerns that came forward already in this process as items, you know, as key concerns for us to consider, so. was gonna look at what else is on here for us to discuss. So, this number 3 bullet that's here says for 25-26 school year, no voluntary transfer requests excluding grade 4 going to grade 5. So that was placed on there. I know that I don't wanna assume why someone might have placed that on there. I know that has been a conversation that with what we're going to do for this upcoming year, having everybody placed in their home school. It's just that the voluntary transfers are not guaranteed. They would be considered. I'm actually sitting down tomorrow with our registrant to go through that list and see if there are any that I can approve or not approve, so we can start getting letters out next week to families. Just to, especially for kindergarten families, to know exactly if they are in their home school or not, and for where the overages are, what school they will be going to. So that's something that we're looking at tomorrow as the next step. Next bullet here says September through November of 2025, team meets to determine start time changes and review possible line changes for all schools. Line changes and like boundary lines, is that what?
Yeah, this is me, so this was
Okay.
just summarizing some of the things that we've talked about. Yeah, line changes, because I agree with you that I feel like we still continue to have overcrowded schools, and that is the primary like concern for us right now.
I think too with that, the bridge is not gonna be a concern for the school year anymore, right?
No, the bridge, they actually start Friday, so
Oh.
we sent out an email.
Yes.
So Friday night the bridge closes, but the bridge, we haven't been able to use it with school buses.
Okay,
But what that's going to create now is additional detours around the town,
Okay.
congestion, traffic.
Okay.
But that work
Again,
will be
that's-
finished for the year that we're looking
Yeah, they're
at
starting
doing
now, so
changes,
we
so it
know-
won't interfere.
Yeah, and that could also help us improve transportation routes in another
Yeah,
year.
it'll open
So-
things up.
because I think
Yeah.
that also opens the possibility of, because I do think that there, from kind of what you said, geographically, part of the challenge of this redistricting is where people are located. A lot of people are buying houses in the Hamilton area, that's just what's happening. But with the bridge, I think that opens up the possibility of Stony Lane, Forest Park, and Quidnesset being able to kind of work, and then Hamilton transferring down. So I would agree that looking back at those boundary lines with some of the new information we have, I feel like opens more possibilities
Which
for.
is why I put all schools,
Mhm.
because like we started that, but then we had limitations.
Well, I think that also goes back to sort of, the charge of minimizing disruption is, we tried that. We tried to make as, we looked at the data and we attempted to sort of make as few changes as possible. And we discovered it's really, really hard, right? So, it is sort of tied to that, attempting to minimize disruption has opened a Pandora's box of other issues. But if we can take some of the geographic things off the table, does it help to be a little more radical? The town is a funny shape. It's long and skinny, top to bottom. Sometimes I think it is easier to get to the moon than it is to get to the other end of town. Sometimes my kids play baseball, at the other end, it'll take me a solid half hour, to get to the baseball field, but it's in town. So, it's just, it is a funny shape, and the schools, no one knew to place another school in the middle of a turf farm because there weren't any houses there, and now it's not a farm anymore, and it's full of houses, which it didn't used to be. We looked at all of that, but I think it does sort of just go back to that tenet for trying to minimize disruption. We've sort of not had the ability to sort of explore those other options.
I think if you look at, to your point about the northern schools, the 3, when you look at new builds though, in the future, is not really as much in the southern end of town, it's in the middle of the town, along Post Road, et cetera. And large buildings, and may or may not have kids, may or may not have families, so who knows? But when you look at some of the data that we did get on future developments, there's not a whole lot of land and building left in the southern end, like in Saunderstown right now. So when you look at the data that came back, it's still a high quantity of students today. Moving forward,
there's also life cycles of of neighborhoods where I know, like, I'm not in North Kingstown, but my neighborhood was a lot of like retirees, but now they're actually retiring and selling their homes and moving elsewhere. Now I'm seeing more babies and carriages. So I think there's also these life cycles that happen within neighborhoods that I think is a little bit hard to predict.
So that's what I had mentioned about my own particular neighborhood happening. I mean, when we moved in 12 years ago, we were one of the few young families, and now Brian's at the table with his young family in my neighborhood. Like, I have, it's kind of flip-flopped,
Yeah.
right? Most of the older people sold, and we had 20 kids on our bus last year from Stony Lane alone. And we only had 40 houses in the neighborhood. So I think trying to better utilize the buildings, and I've kind of said this from the start, is there a way we can get it ideal, like each building is being used at 80% or something, I'm just throwing out a number, right, 60%, 50, so that when the neighborhood shifts, we don't all have to run around like, oh my gosh, how are we gonna fix this? We have cushion space. So again, this probably goes back to, there's gotta be some sort of formula, there's gotta be some
think it's
sort
that
of,
that's what I'm saying,
It's
analytics.
that balance.
I'm hoping like analytics can like pull, what is the average home ownership in Rhode Island? When is it usually flip? When do we predict it to flip? Because that's my neighborhood exactly. It's all the original owners who are now selling.
Yep.
And so it's an entire neighborhood changeover. And so truly, one of the things I wonder about is if they can go into the publicly available data and say, this is how often families tend to say, based on that, this is one of our predictions.
Yeah.
So if you look at the information we have from Cropper, there is data in there that's based on age. And it goes for each school, so not necessarily the neighborhood, but in the school, right? Looking at ages of current residents, death rates, projections. So that is used in the current information that we have, to be able to kind of gain that information and have an idea of like, what do we expect to see happening. But it is true, I mean, when you look at the neighborhoods, I mean, the neighborhood I'm in as well, like, when we moved there was one bus that went through. It's like 3 buses that go through now. And like the little kids are like, it's like they're coming out of the, it is because the older generation is selling their homes and newer families are coming in quickly. And so you see that, and like, but once that happens, right, that neighborhood's kind of now set for a while.
right.
But when we look and see the different apartments that are being built, that's gonna have an impact, right? And that was all considered in the new demographic information that we have.
Well, I see this, I'm sorry, God, you've
Oh,
been waiting.
Well, I just have this question when we're talking about start times. Do we have the information at hand, or is it something we have to gather about other high schools in the state of Rhode Island, what their start times are? Because when our buses are departing, for example, I don't know, we have buses on a daily basis leaving between 2:30 and 3:30 for sports, right? I'm just using that example. So, because they have to get there for a game, and the same thing here when they come to our town. So what is the impact and what are we looking for at that? Because that's gonna impact that in a huge way, right? I know that there are some parents that, the high schoolers and the middle school students, if they're in 8th grade, like, are at home when their siblings come in that are in elementary school, but how is that going to impact us? And do we have that information at hand with other districts that have changed to a later start time for high school? Because if we're gonna dive into it and come in with a recommendation, is it something that's gonna really stick? Because if there's only 2 other high schools in the state that are public that start later and the rest are still early, how is that going to impact us regardless, even if we start changing times? And then transportation down the line will be affected because we won't be able to accommodate students depending on their start times. So if they have to depart from the high school an hour later while we're doing elementary and then we really have them spread out, we wouldn't be able to accommodate. So that's a big, and it's that information that we have to gather as a
So we would have to get, we
committee.
don't have that yet, but we can.
I know it was considered in Cumberland, we probably spent a good year and a half to 2 years talking about start times, and they eventually just kept the same start time for very similar things, on top of the fact of the sheer cost of busing. It would've added, I believe it was like $350,000 to the transportation budget. So I know that was considered, but couldn't be done with getting kids to games, same
And there was a transportation study done the year that I got here, about 3.5 years ago, I did share it with Dr. Duva.
And the recommendation wasn't to change start times because of the transportation and how it would impact everything else.
And
And it's from 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago,
Yeah.
but not much has changed
I
here
feel
now.
like I think
Little
all the
bit of
districts
growth.
are having trouble pulling the trigger on that because
Yep.
the same reason. Well, what other schools are have the later start time? Well,
Correct.
we don't wanna do that and then have a problem, so it would be almost like all of them would have to do it all at the same time, and or many, and I don't think you're gonna necessarily get that.
And we did do a study here in this district. A previous school committee did a study. And I personally think it would be a good idea to maybe go back and look through it. I mean, it's online. You can find it online. And again, it was a while ago, but hey, some of the stuff might still be relevant. And I think it's always good to look at the history of, well, why did they decide not to do it? Instead of reinventing the wheel. I don't know about the other school start times. Like, maybe schools have since changed in other districts since that study was done, but certainly not enough, around the state where everybody, like you said, like everybody's like, yes, let's follow these people. I think everybody's waiting for somebody to do it first.
Let's be the first. Friends in other districts that I know of that they've talked about it and they've done it, they've all reverted, it doesn't go anywhere because of, it's driven by so many other factors, not just transportation, but,
Also
athletics
childcare.
and,
After school childcare.
and fields that don't have lights, so then they can't play, or for whatever, and like childcare and.
Even though we know younger kids coming earlier is actually better.
Yeah.
It's true.
I think these are all great ideas and we're, goals for us as far as like directing over the next few steps, few months. Right? Exploring the possibilities of a professional consulting services. Right? Reaching out to Brown to see what can they do right now in the immediate, right? Sharing the data, what can they analyze and provide to us. We want to consider we have a piece around here around the balanced enrollment. Okay? Identifying the exact use of each school by programming, aspirational capacity, and LEA capacity based on educational programs. Right? We've talked about it, but actually putting it on paper so you can all see it. I'd like to share another document that we put together, because I think we need to have kind of a timeline of what we're doing from now until December. We've heard that some think December is too short for us to get a decision out there. I think we need a timeline so we continue working. We don't want to lose summer. Even though people go away, it doesn't mean we can't do work outside of the meeting. My reason for December and budget, it's because these decisions we're making may have, I don't wanna say will, may have budgetary impacts around staffing and transportation. And we need to be able to consider that around budget time, so we're not sitting at the table in April when the budget was approved and say, no, we can't do it because it's not in the budget. And I want us to be really aware of that timeline. I know it seems soon, but I also wanna remind the committee, we started this in November. And we have information in front of us to be using, to be making decisions that we need to make. We're not pausing, we're continuing to look at that information of what we need to do to balance the enrollment across the district in all of our schools. I still recommend December as a goal. We may not have it in December, and it might be January. But if we don't set these goals for us and these benchmarks, we're not gonna get there. And we can't sit and kinda just talk and not have that happen. So I still kinda like to have that there. May not be reachable, but if we can work towards that, and we can give ourselves some time and grace if we go into January, but we also don't wanna be turning around to the community and in April making a decision and then hearing from families, you didn't give us enough time. Because we started this conversation in November and families were still telling us, like, it's not enough time, please don't do anything yet, right? So we are now moving into the next school year to come up with a solution to be implemented for the 26-27 school year We wanna make sure that in this process that we are looking at that timeline of when we're informing families of the change. We also need to make sure we have enough time for the school committee to deliberate on this and make a decision. So, I do have just suggestions of kind of planning of what we need to be doing. Planning phase, which we have been in, we're in, of looking at enrollment projections, capacity of school facilities, demographic and geographic data. There's something that we've talked about to add, what's added on here. Review of initial goals in charge of the committee, I inserted that here. Proposal of development, what are the draft scenarios, multiple map options developed based on set criteria, right? Some of the criteria we talked about, we want balanced enrollment, we wanna consider the demographics, we wanna look at socioeconomics, we want to look at ethnicity for diversity, right? The Title I pieces, looking at where neighborhoods are so that we can consider those class sizes. We have contractual obligations to fulfill, right? And that we have of class sizes, but we can also look at how we can distribute neighborhoods and students within the schools we have, so we don't have one building with higher class sizes than another building somewhere else. All that to be considered to put those scenarios together. Having an internal review, right? District staff and consultants. I put consultants if available. I'd like to move forward to have something like that. Ensure compliance with federal, state, and local regulations and policies. We have local policies, we have state policies that need to be considered in these decisions. Consideration of Title I funding for schools, right? It might be other, there's something else you guys are thinking, we can add it.
Would that be when
to
we
the-
think about what feeder schools for middle schools? That has been something
Yeah.
that has come up multiple times. And equity would be the other. Or diversity, I don't know.
You know what goal or something I would like to see added to this? Could we include the town side at some point on either the town planner, invite them to our meetings so we can discuss the new builds going in and in the future when new building suggestions pass over their desks, that they're very well aware of our side, the school side, and the resources that we have available, the building size, the capacity we have available, so that we're all on the same page when it comes to town planning in terms of infrastructure. Does everybody understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Like, I would love to have joint meetings or invite them to some of these meetings, either the town council or the town manager or the town planner, the town planning commission, just so that we can talk about, even to find out from them, what are they planning, are they planning on?
She just sent me an update today, I just haven't had.
I went to one today, I went to a TRC meeting today.
And she gave me something, I shared with you right away, but I haven't had time to distribute it, so they are aware and we are,
Okay.
but she did send me something today.
Yeah.
I
as an
think more of a
update for what
collaboration
they
would be
have.
terrific.
Yeah,
I have another suggestion for that section, and it comes from our public comment. I agree, it's at the top actually, when we,
the data piece.
capacity of school facilities, I think real versus, like what reality looks like versus aspirational is very true, cause I feel it at Stony, like looks like there's a lot of space, but when you're in the building, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of space. I think that is an important piece for all of us to think about. Should we think about phasing, like something, cause that's been talked about, like how,
Can I ask how would something like that
get phased?
Has it been done? I
don't know, that's a good question.
because I agree, I've heard the word, and in my opinion, you hear phasing and you're like, that makes it easier, and I think initially that's something that we are all have interest in, but on a logistical side, what would that look like?
I think we need to make a good long-term decision on what the maps look like first.
Yes.
Then you can gauge, okay, how much disruption is there?
Mhm.
Is there a need for phasing? How much phasing is possible?
Mm-hmm.
Cause I think if we look at to your point, the maps and then number of kids per grade, right? So if you knew that there was a line changing and there was a predominant number of new kindergartners potentially, with or without siblings, maybe in that particular neighborhood, I think to your point, right, maybe that becomes phasing neighborhoods, but also grades, and maybe thinking about some of those considerations as opposed to taking an entire neighborhood or lines and shifting every student that's there, but more phasing, maybe by grade, by age, by grade, by siblings, some of those considerations that Dr. Dubois already talked about.
Is it possible to determine what like the cost is, transportation wise, I suppose specifically, to like a phasing, to having that process where some kids in a neighborhood would go to one school and some would another, because ostensibly phasing could go on for a lot of years, because, you know, you got a kindergartner who stays, and then their little brother is now, when they're in 5th grade, starting kindergarten, so, you know, that, it could go on for a long time.
Probably have to set a
And so,
timeframe,
right,
right,
so
like
that,
within a certain
that
number
might
of
be,
years.
if we're exploring that, I think thinking about what the cost is and, or time frame we're willing, cause that could go on for, I mean, because of gaps in families, children, age gapping and all that, it could go on for quite a long time.
We did that in our in my last district, and it went on, and then we had difficulty when it was time to say, okay, everybody is going to X school, no longer Y school, we're done, and it went on and on and on.
Yeah.
Because it was then another sibling was born, so they had a 3rd grader, and this one was in preschool, but now they're in kindergarten, and it took us a while to essentially rip the Band-Aid off and say, that's it, they all have to now, we're done with the phasing, they're all going here now. So, and it did cost a lot, right, because then we had 2 buses essentially going to the same neighborhood, going in different directions.
I think the typical model I've seen, and I did this in my last district too, was the 5th graders stay, and the other kids, we just start moving them. Actually, I think it was the 4th and 5th graders, and that was the K to 3 that came in, is what worked the best. I don't know, we're gonna have to see what the numbers are, I don't think you can make any
And that was what,
guesses.
like I said, we tried to do the same thing, but then they had the kindergartner and they had a 1st grader, and it was time changes at different schools, and it became more complicated than, it was a process.
I'm gonna continue just going through this document to see if there's anything else we'd like to add or consider in talk about added there, internal review, so community engagement, right, making sure we have options for community engagement, public meetings, open houses, present draft of maps, gather community feedback, adjust maps based on feedback, right? And then final decision, 2 to 3 months before implementation, present final proposal to school committee. Again, that doesn't line up with December, but again, just trying to put forward ideas of how this could work. Present final proposal to school committee, school committee vote, public announcement of final plan, and then implementation by June of 2026. Sending out family notifications, making sure that all of the transportation routes are adjusted and shared, orientation or transition plans for students that are moving to different schools, and enrollment adjustments. Find that pretty things there.
Very thorough.
I'm sure there's more we can add or tweak within this, but it just gives us, like, to kind of put in specific months of when we want to see some of this done by.
Do you wanna put in not want, should there be sort of a deadline for enrollment, even though there might be rolling folks, but in
For
terms of
kindergarten?
current students?
Yeah, I mean, we have to allow rolling enrollment, but what we could do for K is to buy this deal, and we really try hard this year of getting it out there.
Yeah.
We can't have a cutoff, because you have to allow them, and we still have kids getting registered.
Sure, okay.
But you could say by this day,
Or a goal.
yeah.
I think
A goal
often
of
they're
by a
just
certain-
moving in. They're just
I
moving in,
believe we
like, that
actually
way.
sent an email out
The reality.
to the district and put it out there not that long ago. Thought, I don't wanna say something wrong, but Joanne sent something out for her saying, please register by this time, as a reminder to people. I believe that, but we could definitely have more of a hard date, we just can't say after March first, we're not accepting registrations.
Right. I just meant a goal more
Yeah.
for getting a sense of, where new students were, where current students were.
Is there
In order for June, for that June timeframe to work out, cause I'm even thinking about lists last year, someone I knew had not enrolled by June. So I'm just thinking, that was a mistake, she knows, but,
Do we
Sorry.
wanna put a timeline that we would like, by which we would like the data that we hope that we might be getting from
Whomever.
a consultant? Like, should that, appear on our planning phase? Like that we would like to have that in hand by whenever, so that we can consider it? And should that be part of the community sharing, like a presentation about that? I don't know, or is that just part of our meetings, or?
Wouldn't that also depend though on whether we went with like Brown or like, through the students versus an actual company versus what are we asking them to look at? I don't.
Too early to put it on,
It
cause we
might
don't
be-
know which way we're going.
I think it would be a good idea at some point, but I'm thinking at this meeting right now that we don't really even know which direction we're going in.
Or if we will.
If we can.
Yeah, I mean, we can start that process of like asking with Brown, like, assuming, what can they do for us right now?
No, but Lydia was saying like put a deadline on like when we want the information back to us.
We'd have to find out how long they need. Like,
Right,
could they get it back to us by September?
right,
Could they get it to us around sometime in August to start reviewing?
right.
So those deadlines could come later, once we know if it's realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be a check-in here, I guess, like check-in, like to confirm where we are and what the timeline is.
I was gonna add, it might make sense to put in a progress goal for looking at the maps. Like just having one goal to finalize the maps in December. That time can go by pretty quickly. Like, should there be, just as an example, like an October checkpoint to say, these are the areas of the town that are definitively going to these schools, right? Like the very close surrounding radius of each school or the corners of town where we just say, we are not touching these communities, and what's up in the air are these other communities, right? So we could have more pointed discussions at that point.
That provides better clarity too. I like that.
I think that was something that was echoed from public comment is uncertainty is
Yeah.
is challenging, right, and causes panic. But if you can say, definitively, yes, this is what's being looked at, I think that would help.
Specifically, what are you talking about? Because I'm thinking we do submit every October, we do submit our population enrollment data to RIDE. So
I mean, like, what communities should we not even think about talking about, for
Yeah.
example? Like, that might take 50 to 70% of the town out of the equation, right?
Like the neighborhood
like
right
those
around
neighborhoods,
Quinnesset probably would go to
Right, are there
Quinnesset,
some
yeah.
corners of the town where it
Versus
just
which ones are
only
not.
makes sense to go to one elementary
It's
school?
hard.
If
No,
we
I'm
could
just
just
saying
take
it's hard.
all of
Yeah.
those no-brainers out of the equation, they could be
Which one
more
neighborhoods?
productive conversations in the
And
last
like
couple of months.
educate the community so they're keeping up with us, I think is your point
But also
too.
then too, in looking at the neighborhoods, how many
They know.
children in those neighborhoods, I mean, if there's a neighborhood that only has a few students, and depending on what grade, and they're not
We're
elementary,
not considering,
you know,
yeah,
unless over
That would be
time,
or
growth is
transparency.
going to impact that.
I like
Also too, you're also going to identify neighborhoods, cause you're gonna start looking at, okay, where are the schools located, looking at the neighborhoods, and neighborhoods close to other schools, right? Cause you're really not going back to moving neighborhoods that are far away from a school to transport them. So you are looking at neighborhoods that are closer to other schools and looking at where those current boundary lines are.
And then you can start factoring some of the diversity type items, right? Like if we know that the areas that are geographically closest are not diverse or very diverse, then you can make more informed decisions on diversity for those streets or communities that are kind of in between schools.
Do we feel comfortable with this? I'm gonna share it with the group and people can add comments, right? We can edit this and work with this prior to our next meeting. What are some of the things you would like to see for June, at our June meeting, which is scheduled for? We don't have a June meeting, it's on here, that's the next item, schedule of meetings for the next school year.
I was wondering.
Let's be the first advisory committee meeting to get some dates on the calendar for next year. Just making a face.
No, I'm making a face because I already wanna move a subcommittee meeting in June, and I just don't wanna overlap it with
We
this.
can't talk about that right
I
now.
know, but that was my face.
So, we don't have a meeting in June, and we don't have meetings over the summer, and advisory groups typically don't work over the summer, but I also don't want us to lose time either. Even if it's something that, you know, maybe there's like check-ins or something that we're sharing information, we're gathering information, sharing it out for people to discuss, to look at. But I think it's important that we have a meeting in June before we do break for the summer. Maybe we'll
What
get
are we
to use
gonna
it.
accomplish?
What do we need for June? What do you wanna see?
Can we
That's
have
something.
an
What-
exploration or something more on grants or
Yeah, we can
possible
work on
consultant?
bringing information forward
I think data
regarding
was something like what
grant
more
funding,
metric.
and more information regarding could we do with Brown?
I think we need to
Proposal
determine,
for professional
yes,
consultancy.
because I think we're right now hoping for that consultant, we're looking to say what data are they gonna bring us. I think come June or July, we either need to continue on that route or pivot.
Yeah.
Because I
But
think
I
if
think
we,
that's why we wanted a timeline
Yes.
of, yeah, I agree with you.
because
We
like
can't
if
keep
we're
sitting
not,
on it.
if we're not gonna get that data,
Mhm.
I think we should, I'm not shaming the idea in any way. I
No.
think we should stop talking about it though and move on.
Mhm.
And I think that could be maybe a goal for June, is some sort of consultant data update.
Do you think it was,
So-
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so would the school committee be able to, cause I know like, when we have our meetings and you go back to the school committee always says we need more information, more information. So will they, so will we be able to move forward by that point with the school committee, either yaying or naying that we can put an RFP out and all of that, as part of,
So
part
what
of
can
that
happen at the
timeline.
June meeting,
Yep.
there can be an agenda item
Mhm.
for consideration
Mhm.
of a RFP for professional consulting
Okay,
that can get approved or not approved to put out.
okay,
That's kind of where we would be right now, for a
Great.
timeline for that.
okay.
But you're saying that would be for this June, for the redistricting meeting?
No, for the
You're saying for the June
school-
school committee meeting,
June
okay,
school
good,
committee meeting.
good, so we can get that on there.
And so there's a June 4th school committee meeting.
Yeah.
If we meet, there's a meeting maybe later in June.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we can then bring that information forward,
Okay.
share that. The other thing that can come forward, which is, could be done, perhaps, we're talking about the actual, capacity around the buildings, with educational programming and all that. That spreadsheet can be updated based on the, LEA capacity. So your LEA capacity is what we set as the capacity number. That is different from your aspirational capacity number, and you're setting that based on your educational programs. So, for example, at Fish and Cove with special education programs going there, the number of students that are actually gonna be in that building is less than the aspirational capacity, because the special education program is dictating how many students are in there and what rooms. So that's something that could be brought back and shared as we've been talking about that.
Dr. Duba, do you have, either you, Mr. Nozanati, feedback from the demographic study that we've all seen that you could share insights on, or anybody? I know we've all probably seen it, but I'm just curious, when you guys have looked at it, I think to your point, right, have you guys said, all right, these are the lines, but based on what we know, these neighborhoods aren't in consideration, or is there anything like that you guys have brought?
So to be completely honest, I have not spent time looking at new boundary lines since we've said we're not gonna make a decision for this year,
That's fair,
because
yeah.
there are also other priorities I have to work on that are needed now. To answer your question regarding the demographic study, the report that I provided to the school committee last week, I did put some bullets based out of the proper study of key points for us to be considering and noting. Matt Cropper will be providing a presentation to the school committee on Tuesday of the study. And so that'll be at it's a virtual presentation, but that'll be at the, school committee's in person, but he'll be virtually presenting to us on Tuesday.
Okay,
So, and there'll be more information
okay.
that he's just gonna kinda go through the whole methodology
And if there was anything
numbers.
from that we could glean
Yes.
and use in June
Mhm.
at a meeting.
What permissions or approval processes would be involved in terms of getting our data to someone like Brown, for example?
We just needed confidentiality of information that, the data that we're sharing, right, we need some
Yeah.
confidentiality
Mhm.
agreements signed. They're doing this, they would be doing this as a school project, so we just need to know what that school project will be
Yeah.
that they are focusing in on,
Yeah.
along with what we are looking for goals for them to give us some analytics on the
Right.
data we have.
So there's a
They
standard.
they wouldn't be coming in as professional consultants.
Yeah.
They would be offering
Yeah.
to do some analytics of our data based on their school project.
So there's a like a set agreement that needs to be signed, but there are no other levels of getting authorization, getting the town, the school committee to like formally approve something like working with
Which
Brown.
I will check, but we should not have to do that.
Okay,
But I will confirm that.
thanks.
So can we still go back to what are we gonna do in June, at the June meeting, besides, cause I don't think we need a whole meeting just for you to bring back the data or the evaluation of whether or not we're gonna move forward with the consultant? Are there other?
Well, in theory, if we can get the paperwork squared away, whoever wanted to, could have some preliminary meetings with the Brown students, or at least the parents are involved, and see what questions they need from us, what our priorities were for their particular, analysis. And so that's something else we could, and that would also go actually into our RFP as well, is, what specifically we're looking for. So, I don't know if we're drafting or looking at a draft of the RFP, or if that's going straight to school committee, but that's potentially something else,
We would go straight to school committee. The RFP for the consultant, that would go to the school
straight to
committee
school
back
committee,
here.
okay. So then it might be what we would give the vendor who was approved then finally, in terms of their guiding questions, theoretically.
So by that logic, are we saying that we would want to have the vendor selected before our June school committee meeting?
No.
Sorry, June, redistricting?
No, we could have a document drafted that would be able to be used for the vendor, but we could draft it then to use with Brown, and then we can, revise it as needed, but the central questions we're asking, I think theoretically should be the same no matter who we're working with.
Yeah.
And so if we can get those down on paper at or before the June meeting, if I can find out what they need and we can talk about it at the June meeting, then it means we have that ready to go. It also means then when we get approval theoretically to move forward with the consultant, we have that already, and it can also go to them immediately.
So based on this information of what we're saying we can bring forward for a June meeting, do we believe we need a June meeting? Or do you just want an update? Because I don't wanna just pull us in for a meeting.
I
That's
don't think
where
we
are,
can
what
get a
we
lot
discuss.
done, is what I'm thinking, just based on our conversation, so I don't know. What do others?
Is it an option, I might be the villain for saying this, like if we received an update in June, would it be an option to meet in July or August based on, I know some people really might not wanna do that.
I would say don't meet in July and meet in August.
Okay,
And if there's information we need to review, we use that time to be reviewing. but I'm not sure if July would be the best time for us to be meeting. based
My
on
thought is
people-
just if we were able to get an update in regards to yes or no for consulting, then give them the time to create that data if it was a yes, then to disintegrate it in August and then move forward from there might be beneficial for us in regards to productivity.
So why don't we do this? Let's not meet in June, right? Because there really isn't much. It sounds like it's stuff that could be done through an email.
I agree.
And provide an update. Prepare to, on the June 3rd school committee agenda, to have consideration of an RFP for professional services. We can put it out there, identify, we can put the needs out there, identify costs. Okay? Let's gather what some of those grant opportunities may be that we can submit and we can share amongst the group. If there's additional information that the students, professors, students at Brown need, we can submit that, and we can always send a Google Doc around to gather information and then get that back to who it needs to go to. And start our meetings in August. Continue to provide updates if we're forward with the RFP, if there's enough, depending on the cost, do we have grant funds or other funds that we can look at within our budget? Could be, something that I could bring to the school committee and we look at our fund balance, if there's available fund balance to use for something like this, and have those conversations to move forward for that. And then come back in August. In the meantime, Megan and I will look, and we, as the chairs, we will put together what a suggested calendar for next year for meetings. So I think this needs to be a priority of the groups. Yes.
So can I clarify that the chairs and the committee are happy for me to talk to the Brown people and see how far we can get?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Any other things to discuss? No? All right, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rachel, Rachel, can you turn the camera off? Please, thank you. Do I have did the sign-in sheet come back around this way?
I think it's just right over here.
Xavier, don't move, I have a question for you. The power button's on, hit the record button.
See the red light.
Leave it pushed back?
Yeah, I was thinking, I was thinking on my use. Thank you, Dr.
I see, yes.